Dr. Sue is an international speaker, master of bioenergetic medicine, and quantum field visionary. And today we'll be talking about epigenetics with regard to ancestral healing. And I know that epigenetics is a passion of yours. So would you start us off with just a bit of an introduction into how epigenetics work?
Absolutely. My pleasure. So we used to think that the cell of a body was controlled by the nucleus of the cell. We thought that was the brains of the cell, and that it told the cell what to do and how to function, etc. And as we've discovered more ways of studying our through science and studying the human system, as well as the whole of life itself and quantum science, there's been some interesting emerging realities. One of which is that the nucleus of the cell isn't the controlling mechanism at all, but rather the brains of the cell are a stimulus response mechanism that happens at the cell wall surface. On the surface of the cell wall, there are little antennas on the outside of the cell, and these little antennas are constantly picking up information from the environment, and then they relay that information inside the cell, and that's actually what tells the cell what to do. So if the external environment is shifting in this particular way, then the cell wall antennas pick that up through these proteins, and they translate that information into the internal workings of the cell. Chemical responses take place, and it causes the cell to respond in kind, appropriately to what's going on in the external environment. And so what they recognized was that what's happening at the nucleus of the cell is more like a blueprint that's laid out, and we have, it's kind of like a pot of things to pick from, and we can turn on some of the genes or not that are in the DNA structure that's in that nucleus, which is why we thought that was the brains of the cell, because it has the DNA strand there. But actually, as it turns out, the nucleus is just storing all these potentials, and the environment is ultimately determining which one of those DNA strands are being activated, which aspect of the DNA molecule is being actively engaged in our outpicturing in life. And so how that translates is, we know that we inherit DNA from our parents. And so we thought that if our parents had a condition, a particular health status or an expression of some way, that was empowering or that was disabling to them, that we were likely to inherit that because we inherited, it's in the DNA. Of course, I'm going to be subject to this. And what epigenetics is teaching us is that our environment is actually more important than our DNA inheritance when it comes to determining which aspects of our inheritance are going to be expressed and which ones are not. So some can sit dormant. So you might have had parents that had diabetes or had some kind of chronic degenerative condition that is genetically inheritable, and that you inherited that condition as well. But your epigenetics are going to determine whether or not you ever express the symptoms of that condition. So someone might have a dormancy tendency toward diabetes, for instance, but never experience the symptoms of diabetes as long as their environment is never calling upon those aspects of the DNA to express. So what epigenetics is basically telling us is that our environment is more important than our genetic inheritance when it comes to determining our ability in this life, what we're going to experience, our level of health, our levels of creativity and ingenious. All of that is ultimately determined by our environment. And lastly, our environment is created by us. It's not the pollution in the outer environment that might come to your mind when you start hearing the word environment. It's not the circumstances of your life. It's rather how you respond to them. What happens in the mind field at a conscious and at a subconscious level is ultimately going to determine the genetic expression of our own ancestral inheritance. So obviously it becomes very important what we think, what we believe, both consciously and, where I do the majority of my work, subconsciously as well. So those two have to be on the same page for us to be successfully managing the system the way it's designed.
Okay. Wow. Thank you. That's a lot to take in, but that was a really concise explanation. So thank you for that. So then let's go on and talk about why we aren't necessarily stuck with what we think we may have inherited, like if one of our parents has cancer, or even I know that PTSD, trauma, that type of thing, even those types of conditions or thought processes, however you want to say that, even those can be inherited, but we don't have to, do we?
No, we don't have to. Just because they are there doesn't mean, as I was saying, doesn't mean they're what is going to become activated. And so the ways that we can drop out of our old inheritance and being stuck in patterns that we have observed is because of what I just described. And the way that we have to do that, transcendence, the way we have to move beyond what we inherited for our life experience, is we have to become very centered and focused on creating and generating and embodying the vibrational frequencies that we choose. Because here's what happens, Lisa. It is so often inherited this way. Someone sees that their parent had this condition or has this condition, and they automatically, even subconsciously, start perceiving and fearing, oh my gosh, that's probably likely going to happen to me too. We're indoctrinated into this whole way of thinking. But think about it. The first time that you go to a doctor's office as a new patient, they have you go through a systems review, and part of it is your family history. And they start asking you, did your parents have this? Did anyone in your family have this? Is this condition part of your lineage? And we are impressing upon and embedding upon our subconscious that that's relevant to my current condition. And as science used to think, and many offices in the medical profession are certainly still adhering to this, it isn't the whole picture. It isn't the whole story. And it's up to us as conscious individuals who are ready to awaken to our own level of empowerment to shapeshift what those messages mean to us. And in order to begin to take the seat of empowerment that we truly are inherently destined to inhabit, we have to become very clear and very embodied on the message, on the vibrational frequency that we choose creatively. Because what epigenetics is teaching us is that everything that happens in our environment is creating the outpicturing in kind. So if I'm constantly worrying about inheriting a disease condition, it's the very best chance that I have of inheriting a disease condition and the symptoms that come with it, because I'm always thinking about preventing it or avoiding it or getting away from it or outrunning it, etc. And that's the actual creative factor that plays into our absolute experience of that very thing that we're trying to get away from or avoid.
Right. That makes so very much sense.